Hi, welcome to Focus and Foundations. My name is Tina Kramer, and I am the creator of Simple Learning and the patent pending sound device.
And I am Kelley Phipps, and I own Empowering Minds, where we work with adults and children, that have any number of learning or social issues that stem from disorientation. So our last time we met, we talked about dyslexia, and we thought we would continue this discussion because it is such a big discussion. So as we were getting ready for today, Tina had asked me specifically if I thought that it would be good to talk about the gifts of dyslexia. And honestly, I think that's a wonderful place for us to start, because we oftentimes think of dyslexia, or people use that term, and they think of it as a disability. It's something that's wrong with them. And honestly, it is not. It can be disabling if there is not something done to assist the individual, but it is far from a disability or something that has to encompass an individual's world.
Absolutely. One of the things that I've always found so sad, because like you said, if you have trouble reading, and you're in school and you're sitting amongst your peers and they're reading just fine, they're understanding, and you're not, that affects self-esteem. And our clients tend to jump to the fact, well, I'm not smart. And it tends to be so sad, because if you're an individual that has trouble with reading and that you don't get diagnosed, and you're in school and everybody else is reading and everybody else is understanding and you're not, moms and dads tend to get that look of concern on their face, teachers as well, the other kids, and it's not so nice. Interestingly enough, though, almost always the individuals that we meet and we work with will be gifted in another way. They'll be exceptional. There'll be a more. Now, we know that dyslexia has absolutely nothing to do with intelligence. It's a different way of learning. It's a different way from the status quo or what is taught in the traditional school system. However, we look at trends, and we not only ask about the challenges that a student is having, we also ask about their gifts. We ask about what are they good at, and there's some form of creativity that's going to shine through.
Mm-hmm.
Kelley, what do you see
creativity
in your
or an exceptionality in music, in art, in athletics, in just out of the box thinking. There are so many pieces to an individual that struggles with reading. And so to just back up a second, we think about an individual that is struggling. There's a reason for it when they're struggling with reading, and it has everything to do with the way that they process. They process in pictures. They process big picture, global thinkers. So they are naturally outside of the box. And everything that prompts that new information, which is what school all is, let's bring us new information. Everything that prompts that new information is prompting that individual's thinking process to go big picture. Well, big picture does not do well with symbols. Symbols are two-dimensional, and that's what a letter is. That's what a numeral is. And so if we are looking at an individual that has struggled with reading, then we automatically, for me, my first question is, what are you good at? What are you good at? You have a strong imagination. When they're little, parents will automatically say they have a great imagination. Get a little bigger, you might not believe you have a great imagination, because you've been told so often to be focused, be present, that you realize that your imagination is your problem. Therefore, you've put it in a box and you're hiding it. But you have something that is creative in your world. And so we're always looking at, what are you good at? And then we say, okay, now where are some things that you struggle with? And when I talk to kids, and I mainly work with somebody that's below 20, when I talk to them and we talk about reading, I ask them right off the bat, when you read, do you hear words, or do you see pictures? Do you have a movie, or do you kind of have a combination? And most of the students I work with, they have a movie going on. So they have some sort of a movie with some dialogue, but may or may not have a lot of dialogue to it. They have that movie going on. And that is their own personal, like, they've been able to take this story and put something to it. And hopefully the pictures are correct, right? Hopefully they're correct, but they've got this going on. And that in and of itself tells you have a great imagination, a great imagination.
Absolutely. There's a particular student that I worked with that came to mind, and you're talking about the movie, because they actually do think in pictures, and it's amazing to me. I think this way some, but not to the degree that some of my students do. But I had a particular young lady, I was explaining to her, and we were having a conversation just like you and I are right now. And she's like, "Oh yeah, Mrs. K." She goes, like, "I can't fall asleep at night if I don't watch the movie." And I said, "We're talking about the movie in your imagination, right? Not the movie on TV." And she goes, "Oh yeah, absolutely." She goes, "I write the movie." She goes, "I know the storyline." And she goes, "I just watch it as I fall asleep at night." And she said, and that's how I fall asleep. She goes, "You know, they say count sheep." She goes, "I just write my own story. I write my own movie." And it is, there are some really famous people that have dyslexia that I believe started out just like that student, because
Right.
they see, they literally see their imagination, and then they can write those movies.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about thinking in pictures. We talk about 3D. I'm going to pick up, I've got a watch here, and I'm just going to pick my watch up. So if you can imagine this watch just floating through space, all right? So their imagination, they have the ability to be able to see this watch from all different sides, and turn it any way they want to. Now, automatically, I was married to an engineer for 30 years, so I think of an engineer, because when he would talk or he would explain, or the inventions or the parts that he was working on, his hands were always going like this, and he was seeing it from all those different perspectives. He was excellent at drawing pictures, and many of his ideas, we were at lunch or we were at dinner, and they were jotted down on napkins. And to watch that creativity, that brilliance, that gift. Now, that doesn't mean all of our students think that way, and all of our students have that same gift. But there tends to be a gift. There tends to be there tends to be this unique way. Many pilots, engineers, of course, artists, dancers, because of their understanding of movement and being able to see the world in their mind's eye as it truly is, three-dimensional.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, athletics. And in fact, today I was talking to a mom. We were talking about her son, who is very much a rodeoer. And I have several, because we're in Idaho. Well, not just because we're in Idaho, because there are rodeos everywhere, but several students that are engaged with animals, and they have this special bond, and can predict what's going to happen, and can really put themselves out into the arena and be able to manage and manipulate things. Baseball players, golfers, that are all very, very, very capable, and they utilize their ability to manipulate things in their mind to see and to predict where things need to be, and to put themselves in there. In fact, I have to tell you, so I had a student recently also that she and I worked together, and she could read, but she didn't understand what she was reading. So she didn't understand how to actually formulate the pictures to help her. And she also struggled with this idea of words that had no pictures. But she also plays softball. And when she realized that all of a sudden, when she learned how to control where her imagination was going to be, she was like so excited, because she's like, I can use this when I play softball. I'm like, yep, you absolutely can. And so it was so exciting to her to realize that this imagination that she had thought was not her friend was actually her best friend, and was the reason she did the things that she did well, but also she had the ability to improve it even, to get even better at the things that she was already good at. Just in that same sense, right? About our gifts and the need to embrace them, but also the fact that so many individuals that fit into this picture or global thinker, they may or may not have an actual label that goes with them. Okay. So they have these strengths and they have some weaknesses. And through their life, sometimes those weaknesses get bigger than other times. It really depends on what we call a threshold of confusion, how likely you are to be bothered in a situation, and how likely then your imagination is going to take over. When I was doing my specialty training, I worked with a speech pathologist and I asked her to be my guinea pig. And as we were having a conversation about this global thinking, and we talked about, I asked her the question, right? When you read, do you have dialogue or do you have pictures? And she looked at me like I was crazy. And she said, well, of course I have pictures. I was like, really? And she said, yeah, doesn't everyone? I was like, no, actually, everyone doesn't. And she was like, are you kidding? You know, highly successful speech pathologist and highly intuitive. And so you look at her and you realize, oh, look at your strengths.
Yeah.
And it just so happens that she did not encounter as many difficulties as somebody else in her situation might be, right? She's had some difficulties, but she was able to weather them. When she hit a roadblock, she had enough stick-to-itiveness to get up and over and move on through. Now that's an individual that's a picture thinker that did not necessarily experience the same struggles or the disability that we think of with dyslexia, but they're still dyslexic. Okay. Dyslexic is a type of thinking. It is not necessarily tied automatically to a bad thing.
Right, absolutely. We've mentioned before, I tend to work with more adults, and by the time they get to me, they're like, I can read. You know, they can also look back and remember in school, maybe they had challenges associated with reading, and then that affected self-esteem. But talented individuals that learn how to overcome. I would have been that person. I can remember a time, when I was in school that reading was very challenging. I didn't know what I was experiencing, but it would have been a disorientation. And I had a really hard time staying on task. I had a really hard time maintaining focus. But then we move into a space to where we understand or we learn to compensate. So it always, I find it amazing when I'm raising awareness and I'm talking to people, and then just like you and I are right now, we're raising awareness. We're having these conversations of the different aspects of being dyslexia, and somebody will come up to me after I'm done talking. They're like, well, I do that. I experienced that. Nobody ever told me that had anything to do with the dyslexia. And they're talented individuals that are being successful in life. They figured out all on their own how to cope.
Yeah, how to cope. So I think our biggest awareness piece, in my opinion, okay, is that there are a lot of labels that are out there. And the labels all tend to be around the same aspect of a disorientation. Disorientation is just when my imagination, my senses tell me one thing and reality is something else. And it manifests itself in lots of different ways. Okay, so to be technical, to be dyslexic would be to have someone that manifests a difficulty with reading or spelling specifically. If you're someone that manifests difficulty and you experience some uncoordinated piece to you or some directionality issues, maybe some speech and auditory issues, you might be considered dyspraxic. You might have some dyspraxic type tendencies. If you're an individual that thinks super, super fast and doesn't seem to have any other struggles, you might have what they would label you as ADD, but you could also have some of those characteristics and be dyslexic and be dyspraxic. You might, if you can't seem to put your words down on paper, they might tell you that you have dysgraphia, okay, which is an individual that has difficulty putting words on paper, okay, to getting their thoughts down, either by really having terrible handwriting and or being unable to actually formulate those sentences when it comes down to writing it down. If you're an individual that struggles with math, then they might say that you have dyscalculia. Now, there are real assessments for this that you would go to a neuropsych to actually get it all laid out. So I'm not trying to say or lessen any of those labels, but I'm just saying that there are labels for all of those things, and they all stem from the same point with it, which is a disorientation and a confusion. And whether or not you have so much of a confusion that it truly is crippling, or you have just enough confusion that it's causing you a problem, it's all a confusion and should be addressed as such, right? It's not a personal fault. It is not anything that should be considered a fault of yours or something that makes you a lesser individual. It just happens to be a way that your brain is manifesting in the circumstance.
Well, and this is what we do because of how our minds do work. There are very specific concepts. There are very specific ideas that we can follow so that we recognize that our minds, we go into disorientation. It's just part of how our minds work. That's not a bad thing. It's not a good thing. It's just how our minds work.
Mm-hmm.
But if you've got the proper tools and you know that you experience disorientation, then you can deal with the disorientations directly. I want to go back just a little bit to this 3D thinker, because if you're an individual that somebody, you know, I've ran into this person where I've said, I'm like, wow, you're really gifted and talented. This is so cool. And they're like, no, it's not. Trust me, it's not. It's not cool at all. That's why I'm coming to see you. However, so if we're talking about dyslexia, when I talked about, and I held up my watch and I said, you know, I can see this watch and it in my imagination, I can move it in all different directions. Now, if I pick, well, technically they're 4 letters, but it's very easy to get neurotypicals, normal, don't like that term, but normal people to understand what it might be like if symbols cause a disorientation. So if we consider the letter B, and we take that letter B and we start to turn it, just like I'm doing this watch in my imagination. What are the other letters that we can see, Kelley?
Yeah, a B can become a P, which can become a D, which can become a Q.
Yes. Now, we use that simple letter, those simple 4 letters, to get you, the listener, to understand what can cause a disorientation with that movement. Now, disorientations can happen with any letters. They can happen with any combination of letters, and then they can actually, you know, they happen with words as well. Anything that is a symbol and the way the brain sees the symbol or moves it. Again, normal people experience disorientations as well. I'm sure you remember in school, I before E unless followed by C. That was a very common thing in spelling that a lot of the kids would miss. All right. Dyslexia, however, it's another level. It's a more of something that we all experience and we do.
For sure. And something just want to tag on to the idea of this visualization, that it is possible to be a feeler and be dyslexic. When I was younger, I definitely, well, I am definitely a feeler. People know that, right? I'm got my emotions. I wear them very, very close on my shoulder. People can touch me. I mean, emotionally touch me easily. Okay. Which means that I'm more of a sensory processor. I never thought I was a picture processor. In fact, I watch my children and my husband, who is an engineer, and I would say they are all very, very much picture processors. And I always thought, oh, I'm not, that's not me. Well, what I realized was actually I'm a fast thinker, which meant that my pictures went, and I was more of a sensor, a feeler. of things. I'd get the sense of it and I would just know it, but I wouldn't understand why I knew it. All right. So that is real. And there are a lot of people like me, a lot of people like me, and they would tell you they don't think in pictures. But actually, if you can help them slow themselves down, they realize, oh, I do think in pictures, and I get a feeling of. So if you're the individual that struggles, but you're like, I don't get what she's saying, I don't understand that flippy floppy thing, I don't think I do that. But if you know that you feel things, it's the same thing. It's just a little different. You can get a sense of something without knowing that you're actually seeing it. Now, there are individuals that I have encountered that, oh my goodness, they can describe what they are seeing in their mind. I'm like, really? I can't do that. But then there's others that have this, like, they get this vibe and they can explain it. And the way I figure it, it's same. It has the same, it comes out with the same manifestation on the other side. So because I'm me and you're you, right, Tina? I can't read your mind. So I don't know exactly what you're seeing. And in fact, this is another interesting one. I had a conversation with my kids this weekend about color blindness. And one of my oldest son, I have a couple boys that are colorblind, but my oldest son didn't realize he was colorblind because he could read and he read the colors on the crayons. And so he just knew that this shade was, and this shade was, all this stuff. He didn't know he was colorblind until he was in high school, because there was no reason to know any different, to think anyone saw anything different than what he saw. Right. And until it became really obvious that what his perception was and what somebody else's perception didn't match, he was clueless. Right.
And that is so important to reiterate. So many of these individuals that we work with, it is their norm. It is part of their everyday. All right. And then our experiences, our norm, are part of every day. And then we don't end up having conversations that we truly understand what the other one is experiencing. And it's so important, if you're listening and you're a teacher, I really feel strongly about teachers, but parents as well, friends, of course, to be open-minded when you have a student that, because as a teacher, I was a teacher, you can pick up on confusion, you can pick up on differences, or maybe I should say I could, because I was doing some of that feeling stuff that you were talking about, Kelley. But if you sense a difference or a more in student, it's really important. And I cannot say this, I can't advocate enough. Listen to your students, trust your intuition, don't shut them down. So oftentimes we have students that come to us that are getting shut down. They're telling, the teacher has said, there was a particular young lady that I worked with. She's pretty severe dyslexia, actually. And she was a talented dancer. She was really good. And her teacher had told her, she said, well, if you can remember all those dance steps, I don't understand why you have any problem remembering the rules associated with spelling. Just do the same thing that you do with dancing. It doesn't work that way.
No, right. It doesn't work that way. No. And wow. In fact, I'm working with a young lady right now who is pretty severely dyslexic. She's also, though, very, very, very fast thinker. She cannot sit still. Cannot sit still. And we had a conversation today about her touching her hair. And I mentioned to her, your dial's really high. It's not high at all. I said, no, it's really high. And she goes, well, what makes you think it's high? I said, have you noticed how often you're touching your hair? She goes, oh, well, it's just that my hair's messy. And I'm like, really? Because it looks fine. She's like, oh. So as she started to become aware that, let's see what happens, right? So as she started to control her dial, all of a sudden, things are sitting still for her, all of a sudden. And so we happened to build the alphabet in clay today. And she shocked herself it really kind of shocked me too, how quickly she was able to totally master that whole thing. But it's because it couldn't move. She had created it and she put it where it belonged and she made it stay where it was going to stay, and it couldn't move. And she knew it exactly. I'm like, you are phenomenal. You are phenomenal. And you could just see her face just brighten up, right? Because all of a sudden a teacher was seeing that she, right? Totally phenomenal. And so that's where I would say, as you were saying, teachers and anyone else that works with kids, parents or whatever, when you see those glimpses of what you see as being amazing for these guys, they need to hear it because they don't believe it. They don't believe that they're phenomenal. They don't believe that they have these strengths. It just isn't part of how they process or what their experience has been so far.
Well, and you mentioned a dial earlier, and the dial is a tool that we give to individuals so that they can recognize how fast their minds are going and then slow it down or speed it up, depending on the situation that they're in. Having a mind that goes that quickly. So just like Kelley was saying earlier, she's seeing pictures, but she really wasn't aware that she was thinking in pictures like possibly her husband or her children were. And as she began to slow those down, all right, so she's using that tool of that dial as she begins to slow them down. She's like, oh, well, Now, this can be, I always give this example to people, and it sounds funny when I start, so stay with me because I'm going to throw the audience into a disorientation. But one of the things we do when we work with our students that have dyslexia is we're teaching them to slow down as they read, and then that they're moving down the page left to right. As a teacher, we've been reading, we've been teaching, all right? We assume that children understand. And I always explain it this way. If we have a tree, our dyslexic students see the whole entire tree. They don't start at the top of the tree. They don't start at the bottom of the tree, the left of the tree, or the right of the tree. They don't go to the leaves. They don't go to the trunk. They see the whole entire tree. And they see a page of text the same way. So we take the time to teach them, all right, let's slow down, and we're going to go left to right and down that page. And that sometimes takes quite a bit of practice because you've got this amazingly fast mind, that sees that whole tree, and they can see lots of trees, and we can move right on through them all. So it's important to recognize the norm of an individual. Our minds go so fast that is normal for us. And so when you ask us to slow them down, that takes some practice.
Well, and it takes agreement, right? It takes practice, but it takes agreement, and realizing that everything that we do takes practice. We didn't learn to walk, just one day stand up and walk. It didn't happen. We tumbled and we fell a little bit before we became really good at it. And so when we're working with kids that are second grade on up, okay, that individual has been in school, has been in the school system by the time you're in second grade or to the end of second grade, at least 3 years, all of kinder, all of first, and most of second. And if they've gone to preschool at all, they've been even more, right? They're learning the rules. The rules do not always work for somebody that's dyslexic. You have to unlearn many things that, and the thing is, it's not that a dyslexic's not able to follow those rules. They just follow every one of them. The first one didn't work, I'm going to try the next one. The next one didn't, I'm going to try the next one, da, 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 da. And if my letters are spinning, there is no rule that you're going to be taught that's going to keep those letters. No, you have to learn the internal tools, but there's no rule that's going to work. Okay. It's the same thing with sounding out a word. Well, when we learn to decode, you cannot decode every single thing by looking at one letter at a time. That only works for letters or for words that have a short vowel and it is a consonant, vowel, consonant style. That type of a syllable, that works. It doesn't work when you have a silent E. You have to see the entire word before you can sound out that word. So, I mean, it's things like that, that a dyslexic individual, they're going to use everything. And so when they realize that, wait a second, I can't use all those things again, I have to unlearn so I can learn what's going to be efficient for me. And it's, it's exciting. I had a parent, in fact, he gave me a testimony. It was so funny because he said, the first time I heard Kelley, I thought she was crazy. I'm like, ooh, crazy Kelley. But then he saw it in practice. He said, but then I saw my daughter and I realized that, oh, no, the things that she said were right. And my daughter went from being a timid, shy, scared reader to be able to stand up and read for the entire class and to do it with confidence. And it was because she learned how to control all those things and then apply all of the learning aspects that she had already acquired from school, right? Everything that she had already acquired from school, that then she knew how to apply it correctly and efficiently.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we're doing is we're looking at the symptoms that the individual is experiencing, and then we're addressing each symptom specifically. And then as we give them these tools, we see the symptoms minimize or go away.
And then they can utilize what they've already been learned, or
Yeah,
they already learned, right?
that's partly, I oftentimes, I can work with somebody in 6 weeks, I can have them at grade level. Part of the reason I have them at grade level is because they are utilizing, just like you said, all the information, and we're giving them the message, everything falls in place, and you see them be successful. We are so glad that you joined us today here on Focus and Foundations. Kelley and I try to have candid conversations to raise awareness, taking a look at specific symptoms and giving you answers so you can understand. Dyslexia is definitely not end all. It is definitely not this negative sentence that it's been made out to be. We can work with the individuals and they can be incredibly successful when they have the appropriate tools to deal with their dyslexia, but it also causes them to realize how amazingly intelligent that they actually are. My name is Tina Kramer. I am the creator of Simple Learning and the patent pending sound device, and it is my pleasure to be here with
me, Kelley Phipps, and I'm the owner of Empowering Minds. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. And if you've liked what you've heard, please feel free to like and subscribe to our channel. We'll see you again soon.